Hi, it's Paul Antonelli here. Welcome to another episode of the Ideal Business Podcast. I'm currently located in what I call the Hidden Billabong in the Northern Territory. It's a great location to, you can hear some of the bird life. There might be some bird noises in the background. It just happens to be where I'm located currently. What I wanted to talk about in this particular podcast is why change and review is actually a normal part of business. And I think what actually happens is as you're in business and you've been around, say, if you're running a new business or you've been around for a longer period of time, what you find happens in business is there's two distinct sort of phases and things that are taking place in your business. Typically, there's times when things are going really well, and so things just ticking along nicely, and what you find is that the team's working really well, the processes you've got in place is ticking along nicely, and it just seems to be everything seems to be going. It seems a little bit easier, it just feels a little bit easier than maybe what it should be like, So during those times, I guess what happens is that there's not so much change, but what it does do, what I've noticed happens during these times is that things just, they just tick along, and there's less review that takes place. And it's not such a bad thing, because if you've got your KPIs and you've got your targets set and you've determined where you want your business to go, what sales you're trying to drive towards, and you're achieving those outcomes, that's not such a bad outcome. Not such a bad time to just be leaving things alone if it's not really broken. The only problem with this process is that often things start to change. And business is always change. There's always change in business. It's just inevitable. When you look at it, it's just the way it is. There's just always change in business, and you can't really expect business not to change. It's just very much the nature of it. And so what happens is if you don't have something in place, like regular review processes to look at everything, and to look at spending, to look at costs, to look at performance, if you don't do this on a regular basis, you run the risk potentially of missing a change that's been taking place and then having to go into a bit of a recovery mode, or having to grapple with something that it just comes out of left field. It's a little bit of a surprise, yeah. And so that's something to really think about. And so one of the things that I would really recommend is that you put in place a process where you've got this review and change processes that takes place. And I'd really recommend you do it on a quarterly basis. 90 days is a really good chunk of time to have a bit of a plan. When we're doing planning in the businesses, we always develop a bit of a 90-day set of objectives, where we want to get to 90 days, because it's enough time that you can actually have impact and achieve some core objectives, but it's not too far down the track where you're just starting to sort of guess effectively. And so a 90-day, which means you would do this 4 times in a year, would give you a chance for some review process. And so what you would do in this review process, and it is a formal review process where you do get your team members involved in it as well, it's actually going through, like, what did you want to achieve, and how are you going with all your KPIs, your performance stuff that's going on at the moment. Are you happy with the costs? I'm pretty sensitive, personally I'm pretty sensitive to costs, and as your business grows, and we've got our businesses turn over multi-million dollars, and when you do that, you spend a lot of money in business, and it's often really hard to actually see. There's lots of little costs that are just lost. They just get lost within the business. There's a subscription here, and there's someone that you're paying to do this, and there's this that's going on. And it may have been useful at some point in time, but it's also a really good time to look at everything again And everything's up for grabs. I always have this term where I say everything's up for grabs. Nothing is untouchable. I think it's important that that this review process takes place, and part of it is to help you really make sure that you're not missing something, that your team's not missing something. There's might have been some sort of subtle change in the marketplace, some of the conditions that might have changed, and without a review process, and the purpose of the review process is actually specifically to look for things that maybe aren't working as well as they were before. So it's really about looking, having the radar up and going, what's not working well? Because often, we really want to focus on the things that are working well. We don't necessarily want to go looking for trouble by going, well, what's actually not working well? What's causing us some issues at the moment? So I think it's a process, it's a really healthy process to have in place with your business, is to understand that change is continuous, change is always in play, whether it's external forces that are causing some chaos or whether it's something internally that needs to be reviewed, and having a structured process of review and change and having this sort of rhythm in place in your business will enable you to see if something isn't quite going right. Recently we in one of our businesses we sell franchises. We've been doing it for many years, over a decade, and we've got a really good process and things are happening really well. Getting plenty of leads in place, the sales structure, the quality of people coming through. And it's probably been like that for the last 6 months. And only recently we started looking at, there was some indicators that it actually wasn't going as well as we thought. And what had happened upon reflection, and this is what prompted me to sort of think about putting this together, was that because it was going well and things are ticking through and we're achieving, no one's really looking for, no one in the business was actually looking for, well, what's actually not working? Is there something that might have been working that isn't working? And potentially, I think, now reflecting on that situation, it looks as though we probably missed the subtle changes that were taking place by, I'd say, a couple of months. And so that was a bit of an indicator as to why it's really important to do this review process and to give the team permission to question these things and not just assume that when something's in place, well, it's just in place, it's just going to hang around and we're not going to make any changes on it. I think having this culture of change is important. Having a culture which enables any team member to sort of ask questions about things and say, well, how's this going at the moment? Is it actually doing what it needs to be doing? And often, particularly with your team members, they don't really want to raise flags or they don't want to sort of bring up anything that might, could be something that they just think, well, this is what we've been doing. I've been doing this for a long time. Let's just leave it as it is. And so creating a process, so the thing to understand, which is really important, is that you do need to have these formal review processes in place, and it's typically a deep dive review. So it's really, and the areas that I would recommend that you do this is obviously, when you start at your business, you look at firstly your team, just look right across at your team, look at who's on board, have you sort of brought some other people on board in the last quarter, what sort of outcomes did you want them to achieve, have they actually had an impact on the business, because staff costs are one of the highest costs for most businesses, so have a look at your team. Another thing to look at is your marketing spend. What are you spending money on? If you're spending money on, we run a lot of live ads and Facebook ads and AdWords and all different other platforms and systems. How has that spend been going? How is the expectations in relation to the spend? And you might have some indicators going, it's going really well. Our cost per lead's really low. We're getting some really good results. But actually, is it flowing through into sales? And that was a bit of a spot that we missed. We had a lot of really good leads, quality coming through, booking calls in to talk to people, all that sort of stuff. But actually, the flow through to sales was actually pretty poor and had fallen away. And sometimes there's just things that take place in the marketplace in relation, particularly. So there might be something that's changed with an algorithm with Facebook or different forces in the marketplace. Business confidence might have dropped. So many of these external factors that can impact on the ability for change. You know, you can't really predict these. You can't predict what's necessarily going to take place. You know, and we've seen that in the last few years. Things just happen. This pops up over here. But what you can do is have really good visibility and, you know, what I would call warning systems in place to see if there are some changes. So you may not be aware that there's some changes taking place, but you might actually see how those changes are flowing through in relation to your business. And what I mean by that is effectively what's happened is you've sort of, something's happening outside and your results or, you know, the outcomes that you were trying to achieve in the business aren't getting there. And then you can sort of do a bit of a deep dive to look a little bit more closely as to why that is and what's going on. You know, have we missed something? So I think, you know, standard practice, we like to set up, I do an annual forecast for the business, which is over a 12-month period. And then you break that down into 3-month targets and you sort of set yourself some objectives for a 3-month window. And then, you know, that 3-month, that 90-day process of going back and looking at things and just doing reviews, you know, can save yourself a lot of money and can save yourself a lot of grief by having a structured process of review and change. And I'd really recommend that if you don't have that rhythm in place at the moment, and particularly if you're working in your business, what you'll find is you're in it and you're doing this and you're dealing with that and there's stuff going on and it just seems like another activity. But you just have to put your hat on as the business owner and as a shareholder of your business, someone who owns the business as opposed to works in it, and say, well, you know, what's going on in my business asset, the business that you own? And taking that time to step back a little bit and engaging key people within your business into that review process. And the more that you do this process and you set this up as a bit of a structure and a rhythm for this type of process, you're going to see some benefits from it, as it'll prevent you from sort of heading down a path, spending a lot of time, effort and money in an area that you may have been working for you in the past, but actually doesn't work anymore, you know. And it's very easy, you know, just trust me in business, when this activity is taking place and there's other people doing lots of things, it's very easy to miss things that should have changed or something that should have come to an end or, you know, some adjustment that was needed and it doesn't take place. And if you do that, then you end up potentially heading down the wrong path and it may take a little bit of time to recover and get back on track. So I'd really encourage you to have, you know, understanding that change is always around us in business. It's part of the natural and normal landscape for business, change. When you know that to be the case, that change is always the, you know, is the mantra. Then having an understanding, and particularly with your team as a culture, that you're looking for change, you know, and often it's not. Look, I guess it is where if you have a culture where everything is stable and we're not really looking for change and things stay the normal all the time, that creates stability, but it also reduces the ability to adapt and move with some of the conditions that might be taking place, both within your business and outside of your business. So yes, this was a little bit about change and review, something that I've just been reflecting on the last week, and I just wanted to share some thoughts and insights onto that. Thanks for joining me today in this Ideal Business podcast, and I'll catch up with you in the next podcast. Ciao for now.